Hi, my name's Phil. I like to come out politics, and in this video I'd like to do a bit of a catch-up really with where we are in terms of European and specifically Ukrainian defence issues, really for the long term after Trump twinned two seemingly uncomplimentary statements yesterday that he thought Russia taking advantage of his betrayal and pounding Ukraine, killing even more civilians and nearly killing American citizens, was what anybody would do in the same situation. Absolute psychopath. But also threatening to increase sanctions on Russia if they didn't get to the negotiating table. You know, the chaotic nature of Trump's changing policies alone means that we are on our own. How quickly before we can stand on our own 2 feet, though? But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, unsurprisingly, I've been spending the last few weeks reading and listening to as many credible defence and security experts as possible to find out what's going on. I feel I've got a little better handle on the position we find ourselves in, but of course that position keeps changing. And goodness knows the mainstream media is making little effort to really inform. And there is both good and bad news. Obviously, having an American president who is no longer an ally, might actually be an enemy, is always going to be bad news. Get onto that in a moment. But some good news to begin with. There are a few points being made about the nature of support for Ukraine. One is the change in form of military aid. So although we've been supplying Ukraine with military equipment for 3 years now, the nature of it has changed. To begin with, by we, I mean Europe. I don't just mean the UK, by the way. This equipment was essentially supplying all the crap we had in our stores, which was going to be junked before too long anyway. We certainly weren't going to use it. Now, this was no bad thing. Ukrainian forces were, for obvious reasons, using and trained in the use of Soviet-era equipment. Some of it modernised a bit, but essentially Soviet tech, which is very different to Western design. So, obviously, we had to provide equipment which Ukrainians were trained in the use of and was compatible with their existing equipment. But it was nonetheless the crap we were not intended to use ourselves. Then last year, we started supplying some very different types of kit. F-16s, Storm Shadows and the like. America has been supplying Patriot missile systems. Training, not easy. Your troops are on the front line. It's not an easy task to pull away for training with unfamiliar equipment. But over time, Ukraine has been managing the process, which in conjunction with the fact we've now basically emptied our stores of Soviet-compatible crap means that the military equipment that European countries are now supplying to Ukraine are new. Now, that's quite an important thing to consider, because what it means is, so we're not sending them from stores anymore. Because when we're sending from stores, it's like, well, this is what we've got. You can have this. And you just have to make do. It's either what you need or it's not. You just have to make do with what you've got, right? When you're sending them equipment which is now new, so it's being manufactured and then sent to them. Well, in a situation like that, you can have it made to order. It's like, so it no longer, we've transitioned from here's what we've got, make use of it, to what do you need? After all, if you're going to supply new equipment, you can actually supply what's needed, not just what happens to be lying around. So it may well be that although we are having to plug a large America-sized hole in supplies, which we're not going to do anytime soon, the supplies at least may be more effective. So you can't just necessarily judge the effectiveness in terms of billions of dollars spent. The problem is time. Europe is unable to provide these sheer volumes of munitions that America can. Europe keeps saying, it said again this week, oh, you know, we'll supply this, this and this. And we never do. We never do. We are going to build up our capacity now, but that could take a few years. So we need to make sure that Ukraine can hold out long enough for Europe to build up that industrial capacity to supply them what America is denying them. And this is why we are trying to get Trump to agree to continued supplies, possibly as part of the mineral agreement. But it's also clear that the actual conflict in Ukraine will now last decades. Listening to various experts, I'm thinking I may not live to see Ukraine unified again along internationally accepted territorial lines. Now, it doesn't mean to say that this war, as it currently exists, goes on for decades. That obviously can't happen. The first job is to secure the territory Ukraine still holds, to have a sort of shaky peace, then to make sure we can defend Russia's next invasion targets. Now, in the short term, there's a lot of talk of Trump saying he will not honour NATO pledges for countries who don't pay enough. Also worth bearing in mind, just to be clear, by the way, a NATO pledge isn't necessarily to join them in battle. So if America, like let's say Russia just invaded, say, I don't know, Finland, it doesn't mean if America doesn't defend Finland that it's breaking its pledge. The NATO pledge simply means that you have to offer support. It doesn't have to be military support. But Trump nonetheless would not offer any support, is what he's saying, for countries who don't pay enough, he says. However, I don't necessarily think this is a major issue for a few reasons. But first, like the NATO members which could conceivably become targets for a land or air war, in other words, have a border with Russia or very close to it, all spend the required amount anyway. Like the countries which are falling short, countries like Spain or Belgium, the ones that aren't in the direct line of fire, they're not expecting Russian tanks at their border anytime soon. Second, even if Trump intends to describe anyone not spending enough, if he just decides that no one in NATO spends enough, because he bandies this figure of 5% of GDP, which the US don't even come close to spending themselves, Putin is unlikely to attack a NATO country with conventional forces in the foreseeable future, because consider the situation. First, he's already struggling to chew on Ukraine. He can't just withdraw forces while the war rages, because Ukraine will just then recapture their territory. But even if a peace agreement is reached which prevents Ukraine doing that for now, in other words, it sort of secures the territory, as long as Russia doesn't break it, then Ukraine won't be able to either. Why would Putin imagine he would do any better against Finland than he has against Ukraine? A country which has recently been making the point that it is the only European country bordering Russia which has remained independent of Russia throughout the Soviet era and beyond. More obvious targets would be Georgia and possibly Moldova. I don't know what we will do to help those countries, but even if Putin launches really successful and above all quick campaigns in those countries, by the time he can even think about invading a NATO country, Europe will surely have made a lot of progress on rearming. And I guess Putin would also need to spend some time rearming himself before he can even attempt to invade somewhere like Georgia. And the longer it takes for Russia to agree a peace deal with Ukraine, the longer it takes before he can start that timer. You know, the longer it takes to be able to prepare for another campaign. And in the meantime, major European countries should be getting started on their own rearming process. Germany seems to be going quite quickly on that. So even without the USA backing up anyone in battle, sounds to me like NATO countries are at least secure from direct attacks. If things go well and in 10 years' time we can actually provide an effective bulwark against any Russian invasion anywhere in Europe, because surely that is the aim, the Russian Empire project should be over at that point. It can try and expand east if it likes. It's not really going to work. It will hopefully then just be a case of economic and other pressure to scale back their occupied territories. But once the conventional invasions are stopped, it's more the covert methods of attack Putin uses which we're susceptible to. But some of this defence spend should also be used on defences against cyber and information warfare as well. In fact, we may even be able to use the same tactics against Moscow if we develop these capabilities. The major problem may be America rather than Russia. See, we can build up to challenge Russia easily enough. Well, Russia's a small economy, right? It's embarrassing that we allowed any European country to even be partially occupied by Russia at any point in the last 20 years. Our collective economies are wealthy and sophisticated enough to have stopped it if we had the political will. The problem is if Russia gets not neutrality from America, but actual help. It's not just a case of waiting 4 years till Trump is gone. The moves to weaken democracy going on in the USA right now are designed to increase the chances of a MAGA successor taking over, to keep Trump effectively in charge. You can see them trying to copy Putin, can't you? After his constitutional terms as president, the Russian constitution, barred him from standing again. So he just got a puppet to play president for a bit while the constitution was changed so that he could then become president for life. Except Trump doesn't even need to change the constitution. He just needs to make sure that the election systems are stacked even more heavily in favour of the Republicans than they already are, and then maintain his mafia boss-like grip on the party to make sure he selects the presidential candidate. There could be a Trump puppet in the White House for years to come, which is part of the reason why those calling for us to disentangle ourselves from American trade are just basically doing Putin's work for him. We obviously need to become militarily independent from America, but trade ties bring peace. The reason the major powers of Europe do not war amongst themselves anymore, stop, being complacent about it. We used to. Every few years, one major country in Europe would go to war against another major country in Europe. That has been the story of the last 2,000 years, right up until just after the Second World War. And how did we bring that peace? It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't because the Second World War put people off war, because why wouldn't the First World War have done that? It was because trade ties, which the EU and its precursors set up, meant that it was too expensive to go to war against each other. Trump may be insane, but a future Trump mini-me may have the intelligence to realise it's not good for them to destabilise their major trade. The best way to stop America backing Russia in the future is to make sure that Europe is more valuable to America than Russia is. Trade should be strengthened, not weakened. We should follow the EU model. The weaker our trade ties, the easier it is for America in future to ally with our enemies. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.